everybody. Thank you for coming along, and thanks to the people who are connected remotely. We're going to try and get through quite a lot quickly. Excuse me. Starting with a little bit about who we are and then the context of what we're doing. It was Fan who came up with the concept of the phraseology of making better AI conversations. We think there is only one very high standard for conversations driven by AI, which we'll try and convey to you during the next hour or so. In that, we will try to infiltrate your mind about what the design elements are of a purposeful Kaya conversation. Kaya is the name of our technology. It stands for Conversational AI Alignment. We'll go into that a bit later as well. And then we'll talk towards the end about the execution platform for such conversations. Hopefully, we can do a quick demo. It gets more interesting the longer the conversations go on, but hopefully just in 10 or 15 minutes here with some of your participation, we can get far enough to stimulate some of the questions and answers that we would like to go into. So about the two of us, Philip here is a multidisciplinary engineer, I'm told, whatever that is, mechanical engineer by training, whereas I'm a computer scientist and software engineer by contrast. He comes from the real world. At least most of his life he spent in the real world in consultancy, etc. Whereas I, until just over 10 years ago, was an academic, first at the Open University and then at Middlesex. And you can see some university logos in there for work that we've both done for the last 8 years that elucidate, the company, has existed. A quick word about the name of the company, since some people find it a little hard to pronounce. Elucidate is, I think, an Italian translation of an old English word called ipsity, meaning oneself. And we started with a mission on self-sovereign identity some 8 years ago, which has suddenly come back into vogue with the discussions of so-called national identity cards, etc. So maybe we'll get to play in that space again in due course. So, Philip, you're going to tell us a little bit about the state of the art.
So, I think I was being interviewed by a podcaster, and he said, "So, what do you do?" And eventually, he got me to think, what's the through line about my career? And it basically came down to the judicious implementation of automation. And so, I suppose it's not a big surprise that when capable AI comes along, I'm very interested in that field, and I suppose I've touched on AI through my career several times and tried to use the capabilities of it. But when the language models came out and we suddenly discovered that we were having interesting and continued interactions with them, probably shouldn't call them conversations just yet, that was something I wanted to jump on. And I suppose the last 3-4 years have been all about that. And I think if we can go to the next slide. That's it. That's the one. State-of-the-art project. A little bit of eye candy here. What this is trying to show is that each of the frontier models in generative AI do this sort of leapfrogging thing, and this is measured on the basis of their performance in a multiple choice questions in maths and science called the GPQA, which I think is an American oriented test, but nevertheless, I'm sure they have the same maths and science as we do. So this is a gradual progression to improve scores in which they will leapfrog. But I think that this slide's already been leapfrogged. Okay, so this was, I think, July that it was put together. We took the slide very, very recently, but in the last week, there's been quite a lot of AI news. So I'm going to put on my Ron Burgundy hat and do a little bit of a sort of about the news, and if I can actually get my iPad to work. So in the last week, there have been announcements And I've got 6 that I want to share with you as a way, I think, of just setting the foundations for what we're looking at. So the first 3 come from Google. And actually, as we look at this, it looks a lot more complex than perhaps I might believe right now, because I'm seeing an emergence of really only 3 significant players around frontier models: Google, OpenAI, and Anthropic. So the first 3 are from Google, and they've just released Gemini 3, which is their frontier model, and it's actually a multimodal model. I think the 3 significant things that they released is, number 1, Gemini 3 seems to beat all the other benchmarks. But not only does it beat all the other benchmarks of the other frontier models, it seems to be being adopted by the community. So whereas the GPT 5.1 was released fairly recently and beat all the benchmarks, the community was quite lukewarm about it. But the Gemini 3 model seems to have been well received by the community that's been using it. So we have a new leader in the space, which makes this obsolete. Google Anti-Gravity. So they've also paid some attention to the integrated development environment for AI, and there's certainly a competition there. I personally use Cursor, and I spent quite a lot of time using Cursor and being very involved in trying to exploit the frontier of what they're able to do in terms of developing software and platforms with the AI. And that's actually, for me, been the story of probably the last 18 months, actually. I started doing coding using ChatGPT when it was just their ChatGPT platform, and since migrated to Cursor. And I'd certainly, every couple of months, there's been a feeling of profound progress with it. So we are certainly experiencing this. So this is Google's attempt to put their stake around the whole AI, agentic, and development platforms being in competition with Cursor. So we've got Google Anti-Gravity. And then there's the wonderfully named image tool from Gemini 3, the Nano Banana Pro. And it appears that this is not just an image generator, but it's actually a visual reasoning model. So you can actually go to that, and it'll actually understand. You can solve for correct text rendering. It can produce user interface level graphics that you can then embed within your development process. It can summarize entire documents into single slides. So a very profoundly powerful tool there. So that's the first 3. The next one comes from Meta. Now, when I said it sort of came down to the really 3 frontier model vendors, one of them that you might have looked and said, well, where's Facebook in that? Well, they seem to have backed off from the frontier language models, but Meta, formerly Facebook, have released their semantic perception model. And this is a model that allows you to take images and query them. So you can ask about the semantics of the image. What's in this image? Where is it in the image? And that allows you to do all sorts of observation tasks so that you can relate your language models with things that are going on in the real world. Now, it's probably early days for that. I would say it's a fairly new technique, but I think that's a profound area. And of course, it's not going to get worse. It's only going to get better. I think maybe one that you might not have heard of is the Marble World Layer from World Labs. Marble World Layer is able to produce 3D worlds that are persistent and are editable and stable and explorable. So it's like having the ability to generate an entire sort of game world, or it might be not a game world, it might be a factory, for instance, by prompting it, and then you can edit it, you can sculpt it from there. And I think probably the 6th point of news is OpenAI's paper about GPT-5 scientific reasoning. And this time, when they published this paper about the ability of GPT-5 to do scientific reasoning, is not just from OpenAI. It's with collaborations from people from other research institutions: Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Vanderbilt, and Jackson Labs, which is an important biotech and R&D laboratory. So what we're seeing is in a way, we're seeing differentiation between the frontier models in terms of what their applications are. So if you're about using an LLM or a large reasoning model for science, then it's probably going to be GPT-5, GPT 5.1 Pro. If you are looking more for general conversation, you're probably now looking at, well, maybe not even Gemini 3. Perhaps that's too big of a model for the conversations. So we're beginning to see some diversity of the tooling that we can use in this space, but also a sort of requirement to put those tools together in such a way as we can orchestrate outcomes between them. So we're seeing a lot of progress, and I was asked, was it last week? Only last week, about how to think about careers in the space of AI coming. And so, well, don't look for something stable. Look for something that you're going to be progressing through. If you're looking for a solution to this problem, it's going to be a different solution next week when the next set of models are released and the next capabilities come. But even with all this progress, generative models haven't gained enterprise trust yet, despite the fact they've already been used as the premise for, well, mass layoffs in some places. We hear this thing, oh, if we keep the human in the loop, that's often how it's characterized, then we can deploy AI. But that is without the recognition that what this does is pushes humans into vigilance tasks, which they're not very good at. But that's a fallback to say, okay, well, we don't trust it yet. So the issue is with trust is it requires reliability. And that means alignment, that means assurance with the objectives that you're deploying the model to, among other things. And maybe we share the experience with LLMs that they're good for the first few prompts, right? And then they kind of fall over a bit later. It's a question of reliability. They're good for the first 5 minutes, longer tasks, they go astray, and often quite suddenly go astray. Often the model's blamed. If only we'd have GPT-7, right? I'll just wait for GPT-7. Or if only I could have a bigger context window and give it 100,000 lines of codes, all the modules, so it really understands what I'm doing. But actually, we've hypothesized, and we believe what we've found, is that AI reliability is an engineering architecture problem, not a model or context window problem. And so what we've been working towards at Adaptita with our Kaya product is exactly that. It's the engineering architecture to try to deliver reliable, purposeful conversations that enterprises can rely upon being delivered effectively. See, the problem is, even if every step has a high level of reliability, such 99% per step, if you've got many steps, that unfolds very quickly, doesn't it? After the 10th step, you've only got a 90% reliability. Well, 1 in 10 isn't good enough at only 10 steps. So we've actually got to build reliability in along the way. And if there's one point I would like for you to take home from this evening, it's the idea of the engineering architecture as being a part of the solution for AI deployment. So we specialize in using AIs to deliver conversations, and it's the architecture that keeps the models aligned with objectives as we go through a conversation to assure reliability rather than relying on the conversation's history alone. It's really a question of probabilities, as I've mentioned. And so as we proceed with this, please keep in mind, it's the enterprise architecture that makes the many-step usage of generative AI work.
And that's where we're heading to in this conversation, if I can use that word, this evening. I want to start or proceed from those quite technical points that Philip has made, and in fact, business points and economic points that are wrapped up in it all, with what looks like a little bit of semantic discussion of the difference between chat and conversation. That's not what we want to get into. That doesn't really concern us. What does concern us is that the people who should know, the engineers, the members of the British Computer Society, for example, sometimes use the standard tools, the chat GPTs, if you like, as if they define what's possible with these models. And we want to convince you this evening that that's not right. That if you think about conversations and what conversations need, you arrive up at the kind of place that Philip just outlined. So you can go back in history and chat is the younger of the two terms, going back to the 15th century. And the interesting thing, according to this etymology site, is that it's simply a short form of chatter. And you'd be surprised for that word, how much that word hangs on. The older of the two terms that get bandied about and used almost interchangeably is conversation. Now, the sentence that is highlighted is really the most common way of describing conversation. It's some kind of exchange of ideas. It also mentions sentiments there, which we think are important. So understanding what the, if you like, some measure of the emotional state of the participants is important in the conversation. We'll come on to maybe some of that a bit later. I'll not dwell on the last couple of lines there, but somebody who read a draft of these slides was rather alarmed by this and thought they were destined for the courts. I'm not going any further on that. So the thing that really surprised me when I looked at some of the history of where the hell did chatbot come from? Why were we conflating chat and conversation and thereby diminishing what the complexity of conversation and what's needed in order to support it with AI? Don't try and read the entry from Wikipedia, but I'll just point out this is exactly how it was published on the 11th of November 2022. Which is about 3 weeks before the arrival of ChatGPT. And there you can see that chatterbot is being used as a synonym for chatbot. Who would have thought that? But if you look back at the history, chatterbot was the original entry that was eventually replaced by chatbot on Wikipedia. But it took years. 2002 for chatterbot being the first entry, and chatbot was then added in September 2003. But it took until 2017 for chatbot to actually replace chatterbot. That really surprised me. It's not that important, except there's a lot of confusion, particularly because those companies that were doing business with chatbots, hierarchical, non-AI structures, at best aspire to be conversational. And they therefore set the way that we think about some of these things at the moment. Philip.
Just as soon as we get the slide up. Good.
So
organizations run on conversations with customers, students, patients, learners, employees, other stakeholders. Conversations are the meat and potatoes of the day. The communications with other workers, communications with other departments and other stakeholders. But the tools that we use to drive down the cost of human conversations, such as web forms and emails and all of these legacy approaches over here. Some people call these contact technologies when they're deployed in contact centers. So IT help desk, customer help desks, HR help desks, finance help desks, and so forth. These legacy approaches really don't deliver real dialogue. In fact, they frustrate people and they tend to limit outcomes. And what we've got on the right, no way you can read this, of course, screen, but that's a part of a design of a chatbot conversation. And for each node, there's a set of decisions there's a decision that's made as to which path it's going to go down. And then there's a set of prescripted utterances. So what you're doing is when you're getting somebody to interact with it, you're trying to figure out which one of these paths we're going to go down and then give that utterance. And inevitably they end up with this, thank you, I'll have someone from the team get in touch as soon as possible. Please give us your email. Or you get pushed through to somebody who's on a chat application, and they're trying to manage 12 conversations at a time, and you're always waiting for them to come to you, and then have to refresh them with what you were talking about in the last interaction. I mean, what they do, nobody likes them. That's the bottom line. To say they piss us off, don't they? Let's be honest. Okay.
And even a certain so-called chatbot has a view which we can't really demur from. And that is that the things that we are used to using that claim to provide conversations can only maintain some context within limits. They can infer something on intent and tone and generate language that feels human-like in relation. But they don't converse in the human sense. There's no awareness, there's no belief, the genuine co-intentionality. And intention becomes a really important part of this. Any conversation that we might get involved with, whether we state it at the beginning or not, the participants have intention regarding that conversation. Also, the context is bounded by the session length or token window in an AI chatbot. Also, the continuity is simulated and not experienced. And this is how ChatGPT, just a couple of weeks ago, described the difference between conversation and the way that, for example, these standard tools and APIs could support what ChatGPT determined was conversation.
I saw that only this morning, and I have to say I'm finding it hard to disagree with it. And I would like Mark to share with me what the prompt he used to get ChatGPT.
That will cost you a pizza tonight. But it's important, and we see we'll come on to some of these issues later on about where things go wrong, and the LLMs are criticized for not doing things in the right way according to some human expertise. That may be a valid question to raise, but the other side of it is how well was that LLM used? How well directed was the prompt? How much context was given? And those are key elements of it. Do you want to talk about this?
So when we look at conversations, I think we can start reasoning about what the qualities of those conversations are. And I think we'll probably have a few slides that are a little bit similar to this in this presentation, but certainly we want continuity out of the conversation. We don't want it to be jarring and have broken threads in it. We want some reciprocity from it. So that's quite a subtle thing. In humans, we have a cognitive bias around reciprocity. Well, if somebody's been generous to us, we're more likely to be generous back to them. In fact, we'll typically be more generous back to them. And so it's a very useful tool to get people to engage in conversation. If you share more in the conversation, you tend to get more shared back. You can start tersing, you can start growing the quality of the interactions. Intentionality. So this is, I think, one of the keys here is if you go to a ChatGPT type interface, which, by the way, in French means a cat's fart, by the way. Did you know that? Chat and Jupiter. Believe it or not, it actually means exactly that. But you key in your prompt and it spits something out. It's got no intentionality except for actually what was the term that was used for it? The instruct model. So as we experience the evolution of the LLMs from OpenAI, there was a threshold moment in which they started training the LLMs to follow instructions. And so the instruct model is what that one's based on. I suspect many more of the models are based on. So you give it a prompt, and that's effectively its instruction. It's go off, do this, satisfy my immediate need. But it's got no other objective than that, unless you give it some objective, which is what our architecture is about. Situational awareness. It's about understanding something about the way that you're relating to it. Clearly, memory in terms of understanding from the conversation what's salient, what you've already said, being able to refer back. So when you use indefinite articles, it understands what you're referring to. And emergence. how do we define emergence in conversation? There's something about, yes, all it's doing is predicting the next token, but actually somehow we read those tokens and we get meaning from them. So it's the value of the exchange emerges often from unexpected directions.
Yes, I think it really is the unexpected, the surprise that you get when you get something back, that you react as if you've never thought of it in that way before.
So that's conversations in general, but also with AI conversations, we need all of that, but we also need to be delivering the purpose that you are designed for. So in an AI conversation, it can't just be following the instruction. We're trying to achieve some form of outcomes, and we're trying to do it in a particular way. And that's what we call purposeful conversations. They have some objective. And we also make an assertion that it needs to comply with your brand values as an organization. It can't be done in such a way as undermines your position.
Yeah. So what we thought we'd do is to expose some of our thinking, which categorizes some of the conversation types that we can't go into everything that we've looked at or worked on. We're going to show you some, I've called them use cases. It's debatable as to whether they're use cases as were originally developed for OO back in the day. I'm looking at one person in particular for a smile on that one. But I think they'll give you a flavor of how the purpose of a conversation, which has some ownership, where purpose is actually a set of different elements, if you like, how those will map into different kinds of solutions. Best show you those. So the first thing to do is Philip and I will just share this as we go through this set of ideas. You can come up with a typology for the kind of conversations which give the designer a chance of getting started quickly, getting off the blank piece of paper, knowing what direction to go in, to reuse some of the elements that we have devised before, and we can explore some of that later with you. So one of the first ones is what we've called informative conversations, to impart or push out, if you like, knowledge, or introduce new ideas to the human user.
Yeah, I think it's quite useful to just look a little bit into the provenance of this particular slide, which was we were working with a business books company, and we tried to help them understand a little bit about the kinds of conversations that they could generate, they could create, that supported their mission. And so this is by no means cumulatively exhaustive. This is by no means mutually exclusive. They blend between the two. And I suppose what we're trying to do is help you think about conversations by example a little bit. So yeah, far too many words on this slide, clearly, but all the way from informative to learning conversations, collaborative conversations to develop ideas, supportive conversations to offer emotional support, strategic conversations to help people step back from the day-to-day and reason about their organization and the enterprise, feedback conversations around performance and self-reflective conversations there. So this is, it's a little bit of a grab bag from that basis, but we thought it was useful to share this, because what we're trying to give you here is a bit of an impression about the sheer scale of the organization, the conversation space that lends itself with the right tools to automation. And it is really huge. And we'll come to a number later.
One of the points of these terms in blue on the left-hand side after the numbers is that, as I said, it gives a starting point for a conversation designer to think what the intention is. And that intention doesn't belong to the designer. It belongs to the owner of the conversation. So harking back to Philip's comments about organizational trust. What we're trying to do is provide conversations that can be offered by organizations, by corporates, by charities, by social groups of various type to their users so that they can get benefit from them in some way.
You may well have picked up a term there that Mark used about conversation designers. And actually, one of the challenges we've had with building out Kaya is we quickly identified that to create these purposeful approaches and orchestrate reliable conversations, one needed to have a design process, and therefore, yes, you needed a designer. So we've been building tools and building our platform for a job that we expect to exist, but actually really doesn't exist in any scale at the moment. There are certainly conversation designers, don't get me wrong, but AI conversation designers, that's a new breed. And so we've actually had to innovate around the question of actually what tools can we provide a future role of an AI conversation designer to make the challenge tractable for them. So we think we've achieved it, or are achieving it, I should say.
So here's some of we're not again trying to read all of this, but to give you a feeling for it. And the way it's been laid out is to try and suggest some clues as well about how we go about things. So here is imagining a university. I've anonymized the real owners, if you like. And so here we've got the second smallest island, I think, in the UK, assuming it's got a university and it's got a career service. And that there is a facility is being provided by the career service to the students of that august institution, so that on graduation they can work out what their options are. Now, actually, I'll just as an aside point out the term coach. Predecessors to this conversation have been called counselor, with an argument going on in those that are trying to satisfy the need of the owner here as to whether it's a short-term interaction or whether it's rather longer term. Is it something, say, for a student in their final year to begin a coaching conversation that will last 6 or 9 months, or is it something that once the results are in, a counsellor can help? And that use of language can tip the balance in many ways as to which way to go. Anyway, this one's a coach.
This is we're going to be demonstrating this.
Yeah, with a bit of luck, this is the one you'll get to see. So we can talk some more about that. I built into this, the design of this was the Gallup created Clifton Strengths framework, which looks at various capabilities, etc. So part of the design is actually on behalf of the owner to determine what the human user, what their interests are, what are they likely to be good at, and so on. We can come back to that.
Can I do this since I joined this conversation? So I believe, and so this is based on a personal belief, that you should work to your strengths. I think you'll have a more satisfying career if you work to your strengths than if you try to plug the gaps and be a generalist. So the point of that is take the things you're good at and that you're strong at and develop them as much as you can. And so that was one of the key principles that I decided I should base this conversation on. I did a little bit of research and discovered that, yes, the LLMs understood. They knew what the Gallup strengths were and they could list them all out. And I thought, well, actually, I'll test that and I'll see, can it actually elicit from conversation what my strengths are? And I found it was actually quite good at that. You didn't need to do the question. You didn't need to use their questionnaire. You didn't need to use their survey tool to find your top 5 strengths. You could do it through an interview process using language models. The second principle that I applied to this was the one called decision quality, which actually I learned at Chevron, and they teach to all of their senior executives. I wasn't a senior executive, I was an advisor to them. But decision quality is based on the premise that you don't judge the quality of a decision by the outcomes, You judge it by the process that you used to make the decision and how well you executed that process. And to understand how well you've executed that process, does it motivate you to action? And so what this process does, what this conversation does, is uses these two technologies of Clifton's strengths and decision quality to actually try to nurture somebody through a career coaching conversation, always with the intention of getting them to make plans that they then act on, because that's a good quality decision based on, am I using and applying the things that I'm strong at and enjoy doing?
The encapsulation of the purpose is here at the bottom, the goal for the user to develop clarity about what they want to do and to decide their next actions. Now, but just reflecting on those two elements that Philip has explained, these are both, not sufficient of them are in the public domain that they can be used, and you could expect the LLM possibly to know about them. But the next one is a little...
I should say, one of the benefits of that is we didn't have to give it any knowledge resources and conjure that up as a knowledge base into the conversation. We could just use the things that were already inherent in the language model. Which is
in contrast to this example, which is about onboarding to an engineering team. And you could guess, I think, most of the requirements there and what the conversation is supposed to achieve. If you look at the goal, quickly become informed equals in the team. But here, we need access to local, maybe confidential information in company policies. And secondly, about, which is almost certainly going to be confidential, selected project documents. So if they're going to be part of the conversation to help onboarding a new member of a team, then the large language models have to be augmented and there are a variety of ways of going about this. But again, this comes back to an engineering approach, not to try and assume, as you might with a chatbot, that if the LLM doesn't tell you about what is useful and practical and helpful in that context, then you need something that can do that. So much has been made about language models. Hallucination is the term they use. I prefer the term confabulation, where they give you confident responses about things and actually are utterly wrong. And that can be quite deceiving. So we want to understand when we're relying on things that it might not be a specialist in, might not have come across much information about, might be private information, might be quite fleeting, ephemeral information from the company systems of records. We have to find ways to build those into the conversation as you execute it from knowledge bases or information feeds. And so this is an example of one that might include the company's policies, the key things about its culture, key HR policies, how to book a room, what big projects are in the organization, and so forth. And that creates in and of itself a knowledge management task and the need to maintain those knowledge bases. Just trying to crack on with against the time. This one is not in our list earlier of the 10 different types, which is a commercial pre-sales type of conversation. So here we've got the idea that a user, before talking to maybe a real salesperson, and maybe not even ever talking to a real salesperson, can go through a very sensible conversation that is not particularly biased towards the product that the company actually makes profit from. So let's imagine maybe somebody switching from PC to Mac, something like that. So where do they go? How do they understand things? How do they relate their old technology with the new stuff, the Apple silicon system on a chip stuff, etc. With the goal of becoming capable of deciding what to buy and maybe even placing an order. So there is the possibility within this conversation that it gets to a point where a decision is made that it's worth putting enticements in front of the user. Now, these again, it's up to the owner to decide this. This is not about us as engineers taking particular moral or ethical positions on this. These conversations are paid for by owners, and they have the right, subject to professional ethics maybe, to determine what is offered in that conversation. So how are you going to integrate that? You can't do that with a standard tool. If you want, for example, the detailed guides about the latest models, maybe even about old models, so somebody can compare with what they currently have, then let's call it a database of fulfillment centers, stock levels. What can be delivered quickly if that's important to the user? And then what discounts, special offers, etc., are on offer. So that's another example of a conversation that cannot be done with the standard tools. Needs an engineered system to support it. You want to do this one quickly?
Sure. No, okay. Yeah. We have a product that we call Digital Acumen, which Chris knows very well. And we looked at that. It's a leadership development product to try to change leaders' relationship with technology, emerging technologies, and its deployment. So it's very much aligned with who we are and what we do in this room. And we looked at that and we said, oh, it's becoming a little out of date now because we've got some technology courses in there that were written a couple of years ago and everything's moved on. One of them, by the way, demonstrated GPT-2. So that takes us back a little bit. But it's been a crazy 4 years. And we said, well, actually, maybe the next round of that is conversation. So we said, well, let's choose one of the modules and see what we can do as a conversation to do that leadership development. And the one that stood out to me, because I love the irony of it, was a critical thinking tutor. Talk about getting an AI to train somebody on critical thinking. That sounded fun to me. So we went ahead and did that, and the tooling had to improve to be able to do that. And so we've had this reviewed by actual critical thinking coaches, and they give it thumbs up. And how can I engage with this? Well, it's really just a demonstration conversation as well. The idea here was we could identify as well the syllabus that you go through, so the topics that you want to go through, and then for each part of those topics, we would have a process that took you from a Socratic approach, where you were asked a big picture question, and you could then sort of relate to that big picture question, and then it migrated through to an inquiry-based one where you started asking the questions of the AI, and it then used the quality of your questions to understand how well you have understood the topic before you can move on to the next topic. So it went through this spiraling process to bring you through that.
And just to link back to the remark I made earlier about the quality of what's in an LLM compared to the quality of the inputs to it. A colleague and collaborator of ours from a learning design company called Team Octopus pointed out this issue of the Socratic approach being denigrated by many learning specialists because of how the LLMs don't do it well. And the question can't be answered, of course, at the moment as to whether it's the LLMs are at fault here, which personally I doubt, or it's the formation of ad hoc prompting with good intention, but just not well engineered in our kind of terms. We'll jump quickly to the last one of these. And this is remarkably serious question, which we've been having conversations with people who are involved in this world of whistleblowing and its complications, its difficulties for individuals, the bad behavior of various organizations, and so on. And one of the big challenges that somebody who is concerned about a situation that they find in their workplace or their client is for them to understand whether it's worth pursuing. It can be extremely costly. It can be extremely emotionally damaging. There are all kinds of negatives about proceeding with a case like this, but some people are motivated to do it for various reasons. It also can get conflated with personal problems that result in dismissal, for example. So whether it's a whistleblowing situation or whether it's something about employment and employment tribunals is really difficult. And it's extremely hard to get advice on this. Just imagine it, taking it to your employer or taking it to to others who don't have the expertise in the area to be able to tell, whether a particular compliance regulation is being adhered to or not. So here, there are all kinds of documents, from government documents, from charities that aim to help people who are thinking of going down this route, from citizens' advice, and so on. So we've got a lot that's out there in the public domain, but what we can't put into a conversation like this are the private documents of, let's say, an organization that has gone wrong for some reason. So there are real challenges in this kind of conversation. And there we probably do have to rely on what the LLMs have found in what might be called the public domain.
By the way, that use case came from a conversation we had at the BCS.
Yes. Yes. Nicely remembered. Yeah. Wasn't too much Peter that night to write that out. Okay, let's move on to what then is needed. And I think we should skip through a few of these quickly and get to the engineering point. One of the aspects, we've talked a lot about aspects of a conversation, and they all require conversation design decisions to be made. Hence our reference to our colleague who is trying to refine what AI conversation design actually means. The actual models that are used, possibly in different parts of the system, have to be considered as well as design choices. Now, Philip sort of went through some of the important things that have come out just in the last few weeks associated with many of these well-recognized brands on the left-hand side. The last three being Chinese, Mistral being French, yeah. So, and the rest is US based. So we've got real challenges from a design point of view as to how to utilize these tools that are all paid for. Although OpenAI has an open source model now, and there are lots, as you'll see if you go onto Hugging Face, there are tons and tons of things to look at and get lost in. So all of this is complicated at very least. Philip.
Right. So Kaya is a set of tools that we want to put in the hands of the conversation designer. And the objective there is to give them a rapid development and testing platform to be able to explore the options that they have, the many options that they have to potentially deploy within their conversation framework. When we looked at LLMs, we thought, well, actually, it's trying to understand what they've got, what they don't have, from the perspective of a neuroscience model. So on the left, in the orange, you can see the sort of basic neuroscience model and the things that LLMs are good at, were good at. And the blue on the right is the things that we've actually added to those models with Kaya. So they're good at language. They're increasingly good at reasoning. They've got broad general knowledge. They're not so good with common sense, is a phrase I don't like, so I call it practical plausibility. But the specialist knowledge, they need, enhancement. So we have the opportunity to enhance conversations with knowledge bases. They're not good with the metacognition and self-monitoring. As I said, improving at formal reasoning, really very good at formal reasoning. I think through the experience I have in coding using AI at the moment, and I put it to you that they're that good at coding, they're better at formal reasoning than I am. They're not so good at planning, although they're improving in that as well. But what we do is we give them that structure of planning through a conversation. And we also support them with episodic memory. Now, this is LLMs, ChatGPT, or GPTs, they also have episodic memory, and increasingly they're building architecture on top of the LLMs to improve their customization for us individuals. I think we need to move quickly, but that's kind of what Kaya can bring to it. Situational understanding, this one along the bottom, that's things like, do I go west or east? Am I above or below? That's stuff. For for most of the things that we're working on conversations, we're not terribly worried about whether they can give you directions across a city. But maybe that'll come.
Yes, and again, where's the engineering needed to support that? There's a tendency in maybe even what we've said to imagine the conversation as being purely linear, and there may well be what might have been called a happy path through what's actually a general graph. It can be cyclic. It is directed, but you can go backwards in many circumstances. So if this is a kind of classic student situation, you get partway along your learning process and find that you're missing something, maybe some modular assessment before the end has caused you to go backwards. If it's a customer-led decision, it could be a bit tighter, and the loops are maybe smaller to go back to something that was fairly recent and not months and months ago.
So you talk about one way about the happy path, I talk the other way, which is very often we find as we design the conversation, we think mostly about the happy path. If you were to go through this and check every box along the way and just make the transitions between each stage of the conversation, that's the happy path. Most of the design we still spend on that, but because we reason about the conversation, we do the metacognition about the conversation with another AI, it is able to interpret when it needs to loop back or when it needs to repeat things. And that's the exciting thing there, which is that's what makes the conversations so much more natural than the ones of the legacy techniques.
So I don't think we can sort of jump past this a little bit, except to say that there is most of the things that we've talked about, all the things that we've talked about, particularly where we've criticized the standard tools, the chatbot tools, have a reason to be in the engineering solution. We can trace all this, and the way that we have gone. That's the wrong one. We lost one.
No.
We have. You've taken it out.
I've taken it out.
Oh, you've swine.
Trashed it.
Swine. Okay, so this
to be seen again.
We're following a platform engineering approach, and if you haven't come across it, it's an internal development platform that is meant to suit the and give constraints to the developers, but separates development of solutions from the software infrastructure that is needed. And that software infrastructure can include storage, can include privacy, security, etc. All the tools that the developer should not be thinking about anew, where the organization itself has come to a position knowing what is needed as its fundamentals, and the solutions then are built with that. Well, I can, if anybody contacts us, we'll talk about availability of slides later. I can put it back in for them. So our approach has been to, and on the last slide, we skipped past it a bit, was the need for our approach, our engineering approach, to be both cloud-based in a public sense, and to be capable of being used on premises by businesses. Do you want to pick it up?
Yeah, so what is Kaya? Essentially, it's a conversation designer interface with an API and a set of example software that allows you to see how to work with the API to get your conversations delivered. And you can then deliver those conversations into enterprise platforms, into chat front ends, into learning management systems, and so forth. So, or into clinical care systems, or so forth. So the point of it is, it's actually up to the conversation designer to understand how that then gets presented and used by the end user. Kaya also then, it sits in between the API and language models, knowledge bases, and so forth, to allow you to quickly assemble conversation designs and deliver on their promise. I think that's what I want to say.
Yeah, I think that's enough.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Now here's the scary bit, the Blue Peter part of the evening. We're going to try and switch to what we've set up for tonight. The development system in the background is instrumented in various ways, and therefore is not the most super fast of all what we deal with. And we've connected it to a front end, and the diagram's gone now, which is accessed through Slack. Okay, many people probably have used Slack, and we're going to try and make this work. What we've done is we've basically set up a Slack workspace for people who want to use Kaya to experiment with it, to get to know it, etc. And we will allocate them and a conversation to a particular channel, so that the user of that channel, the human user, can talk to the conversation that's on that channel. And there's a bit of debugging stuff that you'll see. I hope you'll see appearing as we do this in real time. But normally it would just be a straight, as if two people like Philip and me, several times a day, every day of the week, are communicating on a number of channels. And we differentiate the channels according to the type of conversation we're having, and we've just replicated that for this demo. So let me see if I can. What am I looking at?
We haven't talked about how we're going to do this.
No, well, I practiced earlier, so
good.
let's see.
The seat?
No, well, maybe in a moment.
So I think two caveats. Number one, having thought through the user interface for conversations, I realized that Slack is not actually a great platform for conversations. It's one-to-many very often, with many channels. It's store and forward, so you pick it up, put it down. So it's not ideal, and there are better ways to present, even if you're having just a conversational interface. I think the other caveat here is that we talked a little bit about these being reliable over the long term and many turns.
Sorry,
we're not going to have the opportunity to do very many turns on this, and actually where the tooling really shows its power is where you have conversations that can last for days, weeks, months, as opposed to 10, 15 minutes. So perhaps not going to be the most.
It's selecting the sharing is the tricky thing at the moment. Let me see if I can do that.
It's that kind of problem that I always think I want to have a portable second screen with.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, could have done that, I suppose. Let me see if I can get it again. Go back to Zoom. Can
I take any questions while we're doing this?
Why don't you do that?
So how do you see your conversation designer do things differently from the kind of people who write the script for the call center script? I think you have something behind it, but I wasn't able to visualize it yet.
Yeah. So we've first of all, it's really quite different. So with the call center scripts and the chatbots, they're not generating the language in line. It's all pre-scripted. And really what they're doing at each node is trying to infer the intention of the person they're communicating with. Whereas with generative AI, the language comes out from the LLM. And what we need to do is we need to give it prompts, appropriate prompts along the way to make sure that that language is pursuing the purpose, the objective. And so in many ways, the AI conversation designer is looking at how you make prompts dynamic across the range of the conversation, and also helping the meta reasoning AI reason about the conversation. So what aspects of the conversation are you wanting to reason about? So an example could be actually just checking what our subject is right now and whether we need to deploy knowledge resources into the conversation at that point. Another one could be, what kind of mood is the person in? Am I detecting that they want to be terse and quick, or do they want to, take a little bit of time and go through this? You could look at it, you could understand from the conversation what their character type is and how they like to relate. Right. It goes further because, take it beyond text, and it could be audio, it could be in the ear, It could have an avatar.
Yeah.
And so how does the avatar render? So there's lots and lots more to deal with, but a lot less in terms of sort of trying to detail out the actual conversation utterances.
So I've managed to use Zoom properly, I think, to get this Slack workspace in front of you. So at 2:36 this afternoon, well, just before it, I created a user called BCS BBN. And in order to test it, this channel was all set up, and this is all I did was I said hello from Bedford. I wasn't in Bedford, I was in Milton Keynes, but it didn't know that. Now this is, you can see some debugging stuff happening there that I didn't want to suppress. So completely unscripted, it says, welcome, it's good to connect with you from Bedford. As we embark on this career coaching journey together, I'd like to understand what brought you here today. What are your expectations and objectives for our session? Are there specific areas or questions you'd like to explore regarding career path, etc.? So how does that sound to you? So would somebody like to volunteer because there's no response so far.
I'd like to point something out. So this question at the end of it is, I'm happy about that. I'm really pleased with that. One of the things we found in the early days working with LLMs was we were trying to create an executive coach, and we couldn't get the balance between stating things and asking questions right. So actually within this conversation design, it's testing along the way to see whether you're ready to proceed with the next stage. So are you happy with where we've got to in the conversation? Do you want to proceed, or is there something else that you want to do? So the fact that it's how does it sound to you leads you into the conversation, and also it's part of the AI.
Is that, so everybody's been quiet, is that good enough? Right, so it sends this off. This is running on 5G, I think, because we found the network here a little slow, so there's a little delay, and here it comes up. So I appreciate your agreement with the approach I've outlined. To recap, we'll engage in an inquisitive discussion and we'll explore your interests, strengths, and aspirations. This will help us identify potential career paths that resonate with you. Now, for some people, that's too verbose. And there was a previous version of this that was even more verbose, and the consensus was to reduce the verbosity of this. So everything that you see is not simply coming to you via magic. It comes from design decisions, and design decisions that are executed by our conversation engine. So we've got some more questions there. Yeah, Fan?
So in terms of, I get an MSc in AI, give me a job. Or find me a job.
Where you think you can go with this? Because you can put in there, as a contract killer, where would be the best place to hide bodies?
We'll come to that later. I'm exploring.
When the recording is done,
yeah. Being a fire starter, you name it. We started one conversation on the lines of, it might think I want to be a fireman. I said, no, what I really like is explosions. And it just went, okay. See if we can find you a job that includes explosions.
Okay, so here's the answer to Fan. Given that you have an MSc in AI, it sounds like you have a strong educational background that could open many doors in the job market. Let's explore your strengths and interests further to find a suitable career path for you. To start, can you tell me which aspects of your studies in AI you find most enjoyable? So you can answer that question in a moment. Are there specific skills or strengths that you feel you're particularly confident in? For example, do you excel in problem solving, analytical thinking, or working collaboratively in teams? Understanding these elements will help us pinpoint career opportunities that align with your strengths. Answer, please, Fan. Or anybody else answer on his behalf? Since
Can I be seriously cheeky?
Yeah, go on.
Please do.
What is problem solving?
Which LLM are we using?
I think this is for mini, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
again,
the choice of that is up to the conversation designer. So that's not the one I originally used on this, but it's more up to date and probably quicker, so that's good. But it's probably been tinkered with by OpenAI a lot more around safety. So
I'm not sure what you mean by problem solving. Please explain. I'm politer than he is.
Well, you need to encounter more current students.
Yes,
I've just finished teaching a session with an AI class before I come. So
okay. So there's a bit of preachiness, or problem solving is a crucial skill that involves identifying challenges or obstacles. I remember one of the first things that I worked on this. I made the AI conversation very strict about anything that I said. So anything where in my mind it was relevant to the conversation, it would simply say, no, get back on topic. This is not in that style. So in the context of your studies in AI, it might mean finding solutions to complex data problems, designing algorithms, or optimizing processes. Does that satisfy you? Or are you unhappy with that? Anybody else like to come in, please?
But you want to say, so to broaden it, what are the various jobs available in AI?
I was going to say, one of the things when I got redundant from HP, they had a laser disc those days, which was an interactive, which was designed to feed back to me how, in that case, the machine learning element of the scripted laser course, it evaluated me. I didn't have to evaluate myself. So I'm thinking that question, it would be nice to basically take a quiz, so there was the 4 elements of emotion, for instance, whether you got an introvert, extrovert, all things that people know already. But it was evaluating, rather than asking me what I thought, it was asking me questions. And I think that would play a valuable element, because those questions there, like what do you enjoy about AI, to me are a little bit, I mean, I enjoy all of it, but that's not good at all if you're trying to find a job.
There is, I'm going to enter to pick up this while I talk. We keep coming back to, and it can sound like we're just getting really boring about this. It all is a design question. If the owner of the conversation wants it to be quiz-like, then it can be quiz-like.
Right.
So
yes,
you can.
Someone said, well, there's a module there that's based on so-and-so, which is an evaluation. It'll come back with a score, which answers those questions. But of course, when you talk about AI, it's a totally different thing than interacting with a team of people in an engineering situation.
Yeah.
And so you have to pick the right model for the right type of person.
Yeah.
So here's the list.
thank you.
Okay. I'll not read them all to you, but it seems reasonable from a quick look at it myself. It looks quite reasonable. Fan, if you're talking to students about this, is that list on the second and third line? I mean, is it reasonable? Anything missing? Anybody else? Please join in.
Well, I don't want to.
In some ways, you've gone the other way. You've also now giving lists of roles. But if you don't know what the person's enjoying, you were saying before,
yes,
we point you at a role.
Yes. So the point in many ways about a conversation design is for it to be opinionated about the things that you think are powerful and appropriate. And we clearly have different opinions on what that is at this point. You've been, in my opinion, impatient, and I think actually having the strengths-based discussion is a better way to get into this.
And I think that's coming out here. So I was saying before we dive deep.
Remember, it's a graduate.
Let's go into.
They don't know so much about themselves.
I think graduates are more impatient.
Next question. The strong background in mathematics. So if I say I've got like just making this up, I've got what was it? PhD in mathematics, MSc, I think, is it?
As well as the MSc we had earlier. I wonder what.
Yes, because this is
direction.
everything that's going on here is as far as the conversation is concerned, one person that's talking to.
Yeah.
It's not multiple people as in this room. I was looking earlier, and I do. It's actually very tolerant of spelling mistakes. So maybe we'll see what happens.
It's all about research.
Yeah, it's capitalized. Now, I think this version has been, and forgive me, anybody in the States listening, de-Americanized. So the spellings try to go much more the British style, but mathematics has come up in capitals, I see. Are you taking over that?
I am. Can't resist.
He spent about a year talking to one of these, and I was convinced he was planning to leave the company.
Are all those 3 paragraphs, are they all written by Steam by the conversation designer? Have they been synthesized?
No, they've been synthesized as part of the conversation. So the design basically says, how is this conversation going to go? Under what circumstances? If you imagine the almost linear diagram a few slides back, if you're moving from, if there are discernible changes, we might call of state between one part of a conversation and another part of a conversation, then what causes that change? And then that, if you like, micro context is going to then affect what happens next. It's also going to, depending on the design, going to say, we have dealt with those other ones that have come before. Doesn't mean you can't go back, but if you are going to go back, there's some work to be done in resetting the context. In the way that well, it's such a long time since we had a conversation, Benedict. I'm sure I've forgotten every bit of what we last talked about. But for humans, it takes quite a long time. If we were to meet only a few months apart, there's a good chance after a little bit of exchange, we would get resynced about the essence of where we got to. And that's doing the same sort of thing. You can't see that in a 5 or 10 minute conversation. Okay, so you've pulled out these. Do you want to? What did you write?
I got impatient and I said, surely you know something about me already, about my strengths.
Your behavior
right?
is quite like
Surely
AI.
What's interesting to me here is only came up with 3, but that's fair, isn't it? Given the information we've already given it, it reckons I'm analytical. I've done an MSc, so I'm a learner. Beyond, and I've asked about problem solving. Bit surprised about this, but to be honest, the things that we've already told it about ourselves would imply that I'm doing problem solving as well, despite the fact I've asked this. Show more.
So it's holding back a little bit and asking more questions. Although this does seem a little bit like it's got to know this BCS, BBN person quite quickly. It is one of the natures of large language models to complete the task. There's a very interesting blog that Anthropic did, I think a few months ago, where it basically said that its models are supposed to stop and say, I don't know, if they can't get to a particular point. But there are circumstances where that fails. So internally, the model doesn't work. Now, if the other models are a bit like that, then there's always it's the same as hallucination or confabulation. It's always going to be trying to produce an answer to a question. It's going to try and complete the idea that it's getting from your statement about mathematics or whatever. And it's remembering the last one, isn't it? And his first one about MSc. They're all being conflated at the moment.
Pantomimes. That'd be Dorset.
He's from Dorset.
I'm from Dorset. We have pantomimes. Your engagement in performance shows a willingness to step into roles and express yourself, and dive back to strengths related to communication and empathy. So it's collecting with more information what strengths I might also have. Are you open to, given these strengths, how do you envisage incorporating the strengths and performance of career path? Are you open to exploring technical skills?
I think you've got some questions in chat.
Yeah, Fan, when we should finish this?
I think we should be finishing questions. So I think exactly what he said. Now that you know, narrow me down to your list of jobs.
Yeah. One of the hardest things that our colleague exposed recently was that partway through leading up to I want to be an AI conversation design consultant. She said, no, I've decided I want to go and open a grocery shop and sell fruit and vegetables. And then it had to do a complete vault pass. It really had to. That would be the same as having a conversation maybe with one of your students who suddenly did a 360 or maybe 180 turn.
But it's narrowing down. So can we ask the two? Is that a good salary? Is the salary any?
No, to get a good answer to that, you would need resources to be fed in from some, be collaborating with and be able to use the database of
colleagues share with us
of
time.
Reed or whoever, your colleagues from last talking about the Kings. Yeah.
Come up with some numbers.
Generative product management.
Was anybody else at the Milton Keynes talk last month? Do you remember where these numbers look low to me from what the Hayes people talked about?
Similar.
Similar?
Well, it's a big range for
it is big range.
Yeah, well. All right. So I'm gonna call a halt to that. I'm sorry if you're enjoying that so much, and we'll go back to
nearly find my next job.
Okay. I don't think we've probably explored quite a bit of this, but there was something that came up, if I can get this back up to size. Clicked on that, I'm sure. No.
They may be the chat blocking it.
Yeah, it's back. Okay, so this is just to do with the Clifton strengths again. Not to dwell on this. So as we pointed out earlier, the Clifton strengths is we haven't referenced the book, we haven't used it in any way as resources to augment the conversation. We've relied on the fact that the LLM is likely to know about it from what it has been trained on. Then the user here, there were at the time I did this about 2 weeks ago, there were 142 interactions between the user and this conversation. And they asked there for their top 5 strengths. That user knew about Clifton strengths and so asked about them. And an answer was produced, much as you've just seen. And then 18 days later, whatever the reasons for the gap, maybe a change of mind, a refocus, but the user didn't go back and look at the history that would have been it was on Slack as well, in the Slack channel, and said, okay, you told me it was these 5 things then. Do you still think it's the 5 things now? They asked like any human being would do, having forgotten the detail of something. Could you just, can we skip back to the Clifton strengths profile and what is it now? So time becomes important here, and you won't see that in a standard sort of tool. So I think we're pretty well there. Oh, okay. Yes, you want to talk about this? Quick. Go for it.
So, what we've shown to you is an emerging set of tools that allow you to automate conversations of some quite rich nature. And we started to ask ourselves, how big's the niche? How much can be done with tooling like this? And so we tried to sort of classify conversations along different dimensions. What kinds of conversations? So either have they intentionality or are they just flowing free form? How complex is the subject domain? High, low. Scope of applicability, i.e., is it very personalized? Or is it in a general conversation? Is it an emotional conversation or is it about cognitive reasoning? Is it intended for transmission beyond the interaction itself? So we're going to have a conversation, but it's also going to be a podcast. Temporal stability, is it about stuff that's perennial or is it about today's news? And also cultural resonance, which is does it use lots of cultural touchstones or not? And so we started trying to understand in terms of how big is the niche based on which of these dimensions are the big ones that we need to consider. And we came up with this 4-circle Venn diagram for the mathematicians in Cantor sets. And essentially, we looked at this and we realized that we were able to do purposeful conversations. They had intent. They could be quite good in terms of emotional domains, high emotionality. And actually, we were corrected on this. We felt that the reason that the box up here fades is we felt that there were some conversations that always would be human because they were so highly emotional. And the idea there came from the bereavement conversation with a bank. So, and I think it was Lloyd's Bank said, no, we'll never automate that conversation. And when we started talking to people who'd been bereaved and had been through the experience, it was like, you know what, I wish it had been with an AI. I just wanted to get it done. So maybe we were a little wrong on that one, but we think that there are greater than $10 trillion worth per year of conversations that are automatable using these techniques out of a global product of $80 trillion. So it's not GDP, it's global product, not global domestic product. We have the global economy is about $80 trillion a year. And we think that there's an opportunity there to automate about $10 trillion worth of the global economy using these tools. Now, obviously, we can't wrap our arms around something that big at Ipsita, which is why we are trying to create the toolkit to allow AI conversation designers to design conversations that achieve purposeful intentions.
I think that's about it from us. Questions, please.
Okay, so
Tom,
just very quick, there are some questions coming in from online already, but given that there are colleagues in the room spending your time and effort to travel here, I think I'll open it up to the colleagues in the room first before we tackle the ones online. But as we have questions from the room, I think Philip and Mark, please repeat the question.
Okay.
So that the people online can also hear. Is that okay? And I think because we are having a really good time, it will make sense for us to put a hard stop. What would be an agreeable hard stop? It is now 8:15. You have to travel back to London.
I'm afraid I do, but I've got a couple of hours.
There's a suggestion that 8:30 seems a...
So 8:30 is a hard stop. If there are questions that we haven't been able to address, then Mark and Philip would be happy to take further questions, or you want to share some of the $10 trillion markets, then
you can
to them.
You can email us, and for those of you that want to scan those and connect to us on LinkedIn, if you connect to us on LinkedIn, we'll talk to you about getting you a set of the slides that has a bit more narrative in it, and maybe restore some of the things he took out. We'll see. Okay, questions, please.
Do you think this will still be always free thinking, or will it be biased towards sponsorship from builders?
This is one of the reasons we wanted to expose the idea of the owner of a conversation, because the owner of the conversation dictates that, if you think of the commercial sales conversation, if it dictates that basically somebody must be channeled to buying a particular product because that's where the greatest margin is, or they're overstocked, or whatever it might be, then yes, you can see that happening. Now, when it comes to more general things like influencing, but particularly political or whatever, that could be dangerous for sure. The name Kaya, when we first did this, the second A stood for assurance. It was conversational AI assurance. But we realized that assurance is part of alignment. If the owner has poor values, then the assurance part might fall away anyway. So we wanted to get that clear and expose it.
I can add to that a little bit. So my way of thinking about the conversation is sales, service, support. They to me seem like the big three commercial ones, and then this category I call nurturing conversations, which is coaching, mentoring, training, teaching, all of that stuff. And in many ways, it's an economic proposition as to why those things are specialized, but the economics of running it as a conversation are very much lower, and the availability is all the time online. I think those roles, those types of things will evolve as conversation designs get made, and we see how that pans out. I think a lot of our thinking at the moment is based on the fact that when OpenAI launched GPT 3.5 on the world, they chose to use a commodity pricing model. They could have charged 10 times the amount per token than they did, because it was that radical, right? It shone a light on something, the future's that big, but they have chosen to use a commodity pricing model whereby the use of LLMs is cheap. I'm not convinced the strategy was brilliant, but here we are. I'm also a little bit concerned. I did quite a lot of scenario thinking about this. And I think there is a possibility that one of the scenarios I worry about is that the data centers that we use to drive these models have a life of 3 to 6 years. That's about how long the chips last. Now, chip production is a global business, right? There's about 100,000 moves involved to get a chip actually into a data center. There are 30,000 components that get included. There are probably 9,000 vendors involved. And it goes all the way around the world. But I look out at the world at the moment, I see deglobalization happening. And if any one of those things goes wrong, then we don't get chips to market. What happens then is the price is going to go up, and we're going to find out which conversations are valuable because the cost of delivering is going to be high. So I'm not convinced that commodity pricing is going to last forever. I think there's a non-zero possibility that in 3 to 6 years, we'll have a phase whereby AI becomes expensive. And so it'll only get deployed to the things that it provides real tangible value to. So that's a challenging thought from this perspective. But I think in the meantime, the only way we're going to find out which those applications, is valuable, creates valuable beyond those measures, is to build them and use them. So maybe we'll come to our senses and won't break down the global supply chain. Don't know.
Other questions? He claimed that we're all having a great time, so come on.
Yeah, so just back, I think it's on slide 25, you mentioned about assurance. So like the case capable of assurance.
Mm-hmm.
Just a bit more.
Could we repeat the question?
Yeah, so I mentioned something about assurance, and do you want me to clarify assurance? So CAIA stands for Conversational AI Alignment, but actually originally, as we got funded, we got an Innovate UK funding for the initial prototyping of it. That was actually about assurance. We felt that alignment encompassed assurance. So does it do what you want it to do? Does it do it in a way that you want to do it? And those are the things that you want to assure in the use of the models.
There is an implication in a lot of the over the last few years that assurance means something that is ethically acceptable by some unknown proportion of the population. And so that use of assurance, I think, has got conflated with that sort of wish for good things rather than for bad things to happen, which is quite reasonable, of course. But the classic software engineering point of view is that correctness means it does what the owner wants to take place. If it satisfies those requirements, then it is by definition correct. Doesn't bring in necessarily an ethical component to that, which is one that is valid, but shouldn't be conflated.
It is entirely possible within the conversation design to plug in guardrails.
Yes.
to detect from any given response whether that's acceptable, falls in those boundaries.
And going back to
we haven't done it yet, but it is part of the design of the conversation structure.
Going back to the earlier question, I could imagine that if certain business activities are to be certified as compliant to certain regulations, then some kind of proof will have to be produced on that. I heard something, I think it was last month, by a German robotics company that is using generative AI in a lot of its robotics development, and its quality process, and at the end basically switches from an AI-supported development process to a human-assessed one. Now, there are questions to be addressed there as to whether humans are really good at that kind of vigilant activity, as we can see with the kind of reports of medical diagnosis, for example, where the AI tends to excel.
We have, I think, a little challenge because we're quite used to computers being very reliable, and then they are deterministic. You give them the same inputs, they give you the same outputs. Whereas we see the AI models as being stochastic in that you give them the same inputs, they come up with different things, and we see that as being problem. But actually, we have got great experience about stochastic things because we interact with people all the time. And we've got processes whereby we train people and so forth. The thing that you can't do with an AI is sanction them. With people, you can. They can lose their jobs. They can not get the pay rise. They can lock them up. They could get promoted out of relevance. So the point is, and I'm quite engaged by that as well from a career perspective, because when I reason that through, we've been told for 40 years that teamwork makes the dream work, right? But actually, I think that personal responsibility is the new thing, because that's the thing that an AI can't do, because it can't be sanctioned. So by all means, deploy a fleet of AIs to do the work and bring them in. But what they come up with, if you're going to then take that to your business customer or to your client, you have to take personal responsibility for that, because that's where your value add is. So that's the key assurance.
Have you got online questions you want to go to?
Yeah, I think there are a number. There is Humbo who was wanting to know whether we can make the conversation a little bit less wordy.
Yes.
But I suppose there's preference.
Yeah, can we make the conversation a little less wordy? Yes, absolutely.
And make it more verbose, whichever the owner wants.
And we can make it adaptive.
Yes. So, for example, one thing we didn't talk about is external events coming into a conversation. So, if the external event is the nearness of a deadline, you can cut down a lot of the verbiage and just get to the point.
That's great. George has a question about data quality and ethics, which I think is similar to the previous one. He have another question around how do you manage the nuances in the NLP, because even UK English have 4 nations. And then if we talk about English in the international context,
you should be able to hear the accent of one of those.
I'm sorry, they need to be getting with the program. Speak like I do.
We've actually done some experimentation on this, and I can see in front of me the design definition, if you like, of saying to be aware of dialect, local sayings, and so forth, and to be able to reflect those back. But again, the Anthropic work recently that I mentioned earlier, and it's curious how uncertain they are of the internals of their own model, seem to believe that there's evidence that in the way that a child might, create their own language, that the internal language of the model is different and therefore is adaptable to any external languages.
We have to remember that the first one of these large language models that was actually commercialized was actually a translation tool. It was a language tool, and that was a Google tool. So that's their provenance. So if the question is, can it be adapted around languages? The answer is yes. I personally won't be happy until it can speak jive to me. But I think that's a conversation design question. But of course, it's always going to happen within the capabilities of the models you can deploy. But there's 16,000 LLM language models out there, so
or more.
There's surely going to be some opportunity for that.
That's a perfect lead into Humboldt's next question. That within the environment, I think you show it in your diagram. The API can talk to multiple LLMs. So
Yes.
can you elaborate a little bit how the different conversation is it directed to different LLM or how?
There are tools already out there. There's a system called OpenRouter. We would say OpenRouter. The Americans would say OpenRouter, by which you can do that dynamically. You can compare the outputs from a number of LLMs. There's something else recently out as well. In that there's a chatbot which actually aggregates the three. And if you heard Jensen Huang a few weeks back when he was over getting his medal from the King, he was asked about, do you use AI? And he says every single day, all the time. But what he claimed was he will pose a question to one, take the output and distribute it to a number of other models and say, what do you think? And then he will aggregate the result and inform himself on that basis.
In fact, in the Kaya conversation design model, you can have a different LLM at different stages of the conversation. You can have a different LLM to do the metacognition about the conversation. So it's highly adaptive to your choices.
Including a local one that's private to you and not a commercial one that's in the wild.
Really. George have another question around. I'll read it out exactly because I think the interpretation may not be the same. So George asks how the black box concept of Kaya is being audited or vetted, and how IP copyrights are being attributed in the interactions.
I think you need to read that again, please.
Yeah. How the black box concept of Kaya is being audited or vetted. So he assumed Kaya is a black box. So I think that's what the second part of the question is, how IP and copyrights are being attributed in the interactions.
Well, we would not use anything that is we haven't been given permission to use, which is except what comes from the LLMs, and that's another question. And the point about them being dominated by the USA, where copyright is different, there are lots of complications there which may get resolved over time. But as far as we were concerned, with those use cases and indicating the kind of resources that would be needed, those resources would either have to be public domain, such as government publications, or would be provided by the owner of the conversation as part of the requirements needed for its design. I hope that addresses.
I'd like to say thank you for the very good question. Actually, that was that's given me a lot of things to think about. From our perspective, Kaya isn't a black box at all, but the things that it uses are, from our perspective, somewhat black boxes. I personally find it quite hard to reason about how transformer architectures work. And I'm not entirely convinced that anybody can hand on heart say they understand how these things appear intelligent, given that they're mechanistic. So that is somewhat of a black box.
So if I correct me if I'm wrong, so that's my interpretation of the nature of the business, is that you are not creating the equivalent of a chat box, etc., for the public to use. You are using your platform to provide a service for a private company or a government department or charity to build their own conversational chat box to support their users. And so from that point of view, the source of data that your clients use, they have full ownership. So the nature of the copyright and attribution is not exactly the same as our challenge to Claude or any one of the others?
I think it's quite like, and I know that there's a graphic designer in the room, so I might ask him to contribute to this. I think it's quite like a graphic designer using the materials that have been provided to them. Who owns the IP of the final output?
Yeah, and
Pardon?
Depends on the contract.
It depends on the contract, and I think that's essentially the position that we would take.
And arguably, if I understand the nature of your business, is that the notion of the black box is actually not one, well, it is black, but inside, because you are having a platform that put in multiple components.
Yes.
So the blackness is probably in the various components, as well as the way that they may interact within your platform. So that explainability, AI bit that some people chase for, it's not a simple one layer problem.
Well, it's not
the challenge is in many ways, it's like anything times random is random. So the fact that we've got stochastic tools that we rely upon to do this means that we are inevitably stochastic.
I mean, a lot of the platform engineering stuff comes out of the DevOps world, and so where you've got development and operations in tandem. Now, for me, not being an operations type of person, that's as black box as anything from the AI world. You know, you can only go so far, and you're in a sense making a judgment to trust how something has been specified. So, by the way, there are very, very few programming languages that have got any certainty about them.
Totally agree. I'll do the chair bit.
Yeah.
Good. So the final question now, I'm afraid, George had this one that we has final. What is the minimum number of parameters to have a fully operational model of Kaya?
I don't think we've never tried to. I don't think we've ever tried to quantify it.
I think the question is assuming that Kaya is a parametric.
Yes, it's
model.
not. It's not.
In the way that a data science model.
We're essentially ours is a deterministic solution using non-deterministic components or services. Actually, more of a service orientation than component based.